Welcome to Previously on X-Men, the podcast that looks at X-Men comics, movies, shows, characters, and more. I'm Hilary.
And I'm Eric. Lencher!
Not really. You're not a villain.
But is Magneto a villain?
Ooh, we'll find out.
I ask the questions no one else will ask.
You're
what
so
if
brave.
Superman, but
You
evil?
are so brave. So anyway, we are talking about X-Men 97 again, and we are at the episode I've been waiting for to rewatch. Were you excited or scared to watch this one again?
You know what? I was much less emotionally distraught after this. I feel like it's a trick that might only work once now. We can talk about it, but I guess it's a bummer to have watched it because it's definitely the best episode of this 10-episode season.
Yeah.
And so, Not saying I don't enjoy what's coming next, but we definitely peaked in the middle.
This is the peak. Yeah, you're right.
So
we're talking about episode 5, Remember It. And you know that line, it's going to be Gambit.
It's a Gambit line, which is funny because Gambit is one of your favorite characters, and yet you notoriously are unable to remember things.
That's true. What would he say?
He would constantly be like, remember it, and you'd be like, okay, and then like next week he would say something, and you'd be like, what? He's like, you were supposed to remember it, Sherry.
Yeah, are we friends in this scenario? Because I like that.
Yeah, you're friends.
Nice.
You're his one female friend that he can confide in about Rogue, and that Rogue isn't jealous about, so.
Stop it. This is my dream.
And you know what? You're also Rogue's one female friend she confides in about her relationship.
Gosh, I'm their bestie.
Yeah. When they get married, they'll both toast to you separately.
And you know what? We wouldn't be here if it weren't
for Hilary.
Yes, and this is already getting into what I was going to say, which is that I will probably talk more than anybody wants to hear about how I feel about Rogue and Gambit in this episode. So just prepare yourself.
Okay.
This streaming debut was April 10, 2024. It was directed by Emi Yanamura and written by Bo DeMaio. And we've got a lot of people back, from the previous episodes, but we have Adrian Howe coming back as Nightcrawler from the first series.
I know, and he's voiced Nightcrawler in, X-Men Mutant Academy, and then he's in some other things, 11 episodes in the show Home Before Dark.
Yeah, we'll talk about it probably when we get to his appearance in the episode, but I wonder how he felt about this portrayal of Nightcrawler compared to in the original, because it has some differences.
He probably felt pretty good all the way to the bank.
You think so?
Yeah, I think as soon as the check arrived, he was like, as soon as that check arrived, he was like, I feel great about that performance.
The only other returning from the original is the original Gambit voice, Chris Potter, but he's not being Gambit.
Yeah.
He's being Cable.
Which I didn't realize that until I finished the series, which is interesting.
Yeah, I didn't make the connection.
I wonder if they felt like he just aged out, or maybe Chris Potter didn't want to do the fake Cajun accent, because it's not.
Maybe, I don't know.
It's not like AJ Lacascio, he's from New Jersey. It's not like he's doing a Cajun Gambit accent that we're like, oh, finally something that sounds right.
Maybe he's just done with the character. Who knows?
Yeah.
But I want to listen back to it now that I know that, because I did not recognize it particularly. So it'd be interesting to hear him as Cable. But let's get into the plot.
We open the show with Trish Tibley.
Yep, she's doing a documentary sort of situation, I guess.
Yeah, an expose. Apparently she's a very well-regarded reporter. I can't remember if Trish Tibley showed up in previous X-Men episodes back in the original series.
I think she did, but yeah, she's doing some sort of long-form reporting situation, whatever it's going to end up being, but she's interviewing all of the X-Men with sort of the goal of, I guess, humanizing mutants, making it be like, you can have a friend who's a mutant, and
it comes up later. Yeah, she says freaks, monsters, but most commonly called mutants. It's like, why'd you have to start with that?
Yeah, it's a little.
You might know them as the worst thing on the planet, but I'm here to tell you they're called another thing.
They also are called this technical term. But she seems to be trying to do some good in kind of a sloppy way.
She's talking about the X-Men and mutants in general, but it cuts to Genosha real quickly because she talks about how the UN has accepted Genosha or given it status.
They've admitted Genosha to the UN.
Yes. So Genosha, which we've only seen before twice, maybe, in the original animated series. Once where it was called Slave Island. So I don't know. Where it didn't really look like a nation. It didn't really look like there was anything.
Well, basically, all you saw in that episode was like a labor camp.
A labor
that had
camp,
all of
the dam, and
with the collars.
the base of operations, and that one hotel they stayed in. And then when we went back, it was in the Sanctuary episode, and it was just some warehouses with sentinels. So we have not seen any sign that this place has like a stable government or a society or anything. So this is the first time we've seen that.
Well, it seems like now it's like that we're at the point where we've transitioned from the original human government to mutants basically running the show.
Yeah, which is a thing that happened in the comics. The mutants were locked in. They had to be slaves and laborers and were treated that way. And then in the 90s, Magneto was given it by the UN as a peace exchange, like stop being terrible, here's Genosha. And so he took it, and it became the Mutant Nation for as long as it lasted, which was only a couple of years there. So that is what we're going for here. And Genosha could also be called Cameo City, because that is what it is used for here. So much so, I decided not to write any of them down because it's too many.
Yeah, well, there's at least one group of like the younger mutants that kept showing up with like Pixie and that Blob guy.
Blob.
We see Nature Girl at one point.
Yeah,
but
Nature Girl for a second.
Sort of this group that were like prominent in the Krakoa era. And so sort of, I felt the first time I was watching it, I felt like they were kind of trying to blend a little bit of like Genosha and
it was
definitely
it was definitely a Krakoa rendition of Genosha, especially in the fact that this society is basically made up of a table of people in charge, and the rest of the mutants are just dancing all the time.
A lot of dancing and frolicking for the mutants. But we're seeing, like, every flash that we see of Genosha is, like, this marketplace where people are frolicking and being happy and being very mutant, very visibly.
Yeah, there's just a random dancing happen. Like, I said everybody's dancing, which is true. Everybody's always just dancing. So I don't know how anything gets done. But there's also just, like, this music. I don't know what it is. We cut to Multiple Man just dancing, and then Exodus of all the mutants is there shaking it, and Dazzler is there performing, and and it's funny because Dazzler's there as like that reddish brown hair from the 90s series, even though, canonically
she's very
blonde.
recognizable.
Yeah. Gambit, Rogue, and Magneto are arriving. And I guess Gambit decided to come on his own.
Yeah.
Like it was going to be Rogue and Magneto, and Gambit's like, I'll tag along.
Because Magneto's there to meet the UN lady.
Yeah.
I forget her name.
There because she's hanging out with Magneto. I can't tell who was invited. I feel like Magneto invited Rogue, and then Gambit's like, well, Gambit.
That's what I think happened. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think like Magneto is like, I'm going to be a leader in this situation. I'm going to meet with this UN person. Rogue, you come along, maybe soften my image a little bit. Mm-hmm. And Gambit's just like, you know what? I'm just gonna come along.
I know she's not, but Rogue definitely plays oblivious to the tension in the Blackbird when she's flying. She's just
she really does.
She's like, cut it out, you two. What are you both so upset at? Anyways, oops, I dropped my books. Which one of you will pick it up? It is like a Southern Bella kind of thing where she's McCorton and who picks up her glove or something.
She does Gambit dirty a lot in this episode, I guess. So
not on a Disney show.
No, that's not what that means, Eric. Anyway, so they arrive. Magneto and Rogue seem pretty much like, this is pretty good. This is a pretty good situation. Yeah. I'm happy with this. Mm-hmm. And Gambit's just trailing along. Like, I mean, those apples are like
$10 an apple.
$20.
Yeah. And they're like,
and like, he's just kind of holding off on like feeling like this is okay.
So we meet Madeline Pryor's here. She's on the UN. She says the UN, no, she's in the council here. She says the UN wanted an X-Men and they have a spare gene. It's just kind of like, how do you get
That was
from
kind of funny.
how do you get from hitchhiking from New York to now you're on the council of a
Yes.
nation in a week?
Yes. Well, and they also, I mean, this sort of fits with Gambit's skepticism because the whole nation feels like it's further along than makes any sense.
Yeah.
Really. Like people are all there already. Like it's
Yeah.
all the mutants have traveled there from
Yep.
wherever. And you just sort of wonder how fast this is actually happening. Like it feels like this is tomorrow.
The best part of the whole Krakoa saga in the comics was the House and Powers of X miniseries that like showed
Yes.
them building it and figuring out
Yeah.
how it was going to work. And, you know, as this series just kind of shows, it skips through a lot of stuff. And so, I mean, yeah, I feel like I would be beating a dead horse here to say it, but as good as this episode is, the fact that it introduces and unintroduces Genosha in one episode feels like huge. That's such a big idea. And I'm not saying they have to do Krakoa and they have to do House of Powers of X, but you know, Gambit's like, whoa, a lot has changed since I've been here last. And it's like, yeah, how did that happen? How do they have this? How do, you know, why is Callisto, why are 2 members of the Hellfire Club on this council? How do they go into the sewers and say, hey, you lead a bunch of sewer people, can you lead a nation? You know, you lead basically, I don't know, almost like a swinger house. Can you come lead a nation? You know, it's, I mean, I guess in this day and age, you know, as I'm recording, none of these decisions are that wild in the first place. Sure, everybody can fail upwards, but in a better world, I have to wonder, like, how does this Moira McTaggart, you know, I guess she would be a very outspoken ally of mutants, and it's also a nod to her role in Krakoa. But, like, why is Banshee on that?
Right. He just tags along with her.
Yeah. It's
I feel like my reaction to how that kind of stuff plays out is similar to how I feel about the Chris Pine Star Trek movies, because a lot of the like goodwill for characters and understanding the relationships, mainly in like the second and third movies of those, really rely on a viewership of people who have watched the original stuff. And so you're carrying with you all of the understanding of how characters act and like what all of their motivations would be into this movie rather than it giving those things to you. And that's how I feel about this, particularly this episode. Like if you don't have any context, it gives you nothing. Like you have to look at Moira and be like, okay, so here is a person who did this, 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 and this in the comics, and you just sort of import that understanding into why she would be there. You know what I mean? Like you have to have that already. Otherwise, I feel like it makes no sense.
Yeah, what you're saying about like you have to go in with those prior relationships. I feel like the original 90s series was able to cheat a little bit even with comic book readers because it was adapting the stories pretty accurately. So if it missed something, you had already filled in the blanks. But the thing with X-Men 97, which I do like, is that it's not doing adaptations so much anymore. It's taking themes and plots and stuff, and it's changing a lot of it. But because of that, there's the part of me that wants to say, like, okay, if this was a straight adaptation, I would understand how it came to be already, and but because it's not a straight adaptation and there's different blocks being put together here to build this thing, I want to see how those blocks came together. But I guess
that's true.
Anyway,
well, that reminds me of sort of a good thing. Because, like, again, we like this show. I feel like we always get bogged down in the criticisms because I think there are a lot of really valid, really important criticisms. But something I did like, I'm remembering from the first time I watched this episode, was that I felt like it was interesting what they were trying to do in like the kind of synthesis of different storylines and like trying to bring those things together. How successfully they did that, we can talk about. But I liked when I was watching it, that they had done that. I thought that was an interesting way to approach
Well, you weren't
a
here.
new show.
You weren't here last episode.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Because of a certain yellow blobby alien
I know.
hilarity machine.
As far as I know, I have participated in every episode about this
but
show.
I had mentioned that I think a lot of these issues were easier to sweep under the rug as these episodes were coming up because we didn't have the full picture. But now that we have a full season and we're doing the rewatch, those things, the issues
They stand out.
Yeah, because you're like, oh, this will never be really explained, or this is always going to feel rushed.
Yeah.
But anyway, after they meet Madeline Pryor, Nightcrawler shows up. And like you said, it's the OG Adrian Hugh.
Yeah, and he's fun now.
He's fun now, and also it's very slight in how they do it, but he does get a character redesign that also kind of, like, his eyes are bigger. He's like a bit more cuddly. He's cuter, I guess, in a lot of ways.
He is. Well, like when you look at the original design in the
it was
90s
very
show,
70s.
It's very yes, and his face is so like he has those really dark shadows on the middle of his face, and like it's all very much like dark.
This one has those big yellow eyes. The hair's a little bit floppier. He spends a lot more time crouched and in different positions rather than just standing up straight.
Yeah, they went into endearing for him, which I love for him.
Yes.
And he's like climbing all over people and like hugging people and being adorable.
Yeah, and he's teleporting like all the time now, which the other one just did. Not the other one, which he did in the 90s series. You know, it was a big to-do. This one, he's just like, instead of walking to the other side of somebody, he teleports to the other side, which is very nice.
He's got a lot of energy. He's very fun.
The animation style of this new show suits him well.
Yes.
He's a lot of fun. He's very smiley. He still has the same type of background and stuff of the 90s. It's just more playful now.
Yeah, I think this was a good remix, like a well done remix, particularly probably because of having the same voice, but also you notice like he still talks about the same kinds of things. When things get a little more serious, you hear references about, him being a church person and stuff. I don't know. Like those things are still definitely a part of his character.
Yeah. I mean, you could also say Catholic.
Yeah, sure. He's Catholic. You still hear a lot about from him being Catholic, but he's much more of a relational character. Yeah. He's clearly, he is thrilled to see Gambit and Rogue, and they're thrilled to see him. Yep. It's like a real reunion. It's very fun. I really enjoyed that.
And it plays off the idea that Rogue is his sister too in this, which is nice. Which I feel like is something that can be forgotten unless they're trying to do a Mystique story. And in the comics, it always kind of feels like Rogue and Nightcrawler should have more of that kind of vibe, but it only ever plays when they're talking about Mystique, it feels like.
I've started reading, and I'm like way behind because I'm reading it on Marvel Unlimited, but I've started reading the Uncanny X-Men that Gail Simone is writing, and she plays with that a little bit more than I've seen in previous stuff, and I just really enjoy that. I just really, because I don't know. I feel like it happens in 90210, for instance. But when for story reasons, you have characters become family and then you just never deal with that unless it's like in the story again. I always really love when you see it just for character moments. Yeah. And that, it was really fun to see that.
Or like how in the Flash TV show when the Flash wants to date his sister.
Like that. Like that. It's super fun for everybody.
So we cut from the fun Nightcrawler stuff. I mean, Rogue is over there saying he always said it would be like this, and Gambit's like, who, the professor? She's like, yeah, sure, whatever, dummy.
Yep, professor is what I mean, totally.
She's very wide-eyed and happy, and Gambit's like, why are these apples $10? Why is Magneto beloved by everybody right now? What's going on?
Yeah, and there's like the huge Magneto statue, and it's just all a little much.
Yeah, and Nightcrawler... I like his line where he says, for somebody named Gambit, you sure have a bad poker face. And it's funny because he's just so vocal and straightforward about him and Rogue. He's just like, marry the girl, be happy. What are you doing?
Yeah, it's so nice. Because you have him sort of, Gambit's just standing back and watching Rogue kind of be all happy and excited about it. And yeah, like you get this character moment where Kurt just knows these people so well. And like you can say that Gambit has a bad poker face, but is it really that Nightcrawler just can see what's going on? And yeah, it's this really candid moment that's very directly about their relationship.
Well,
and how he feels about her, and
it's
I like that.
Is it this anyway? A line comes in during the show. I can't remember if it's this scene or later where somebody says you two touch each other's lives, and he says it's not my touch she's thinking about.
I think it's that. I think it's here when that happens. Yeah, and yeah, he's very clearly he's like getting jealous here about.
Unfortunately,
about her,
we cut back to the mansion during Trish's interview, but also with Jean and Cyclops telling different people how they feel about each other.
Yes. This is another thing that could have been span the entire season conversation.
Yeah. But at the same time, like this scene where Jean is telling the story to Wolverine and Cyclops is telling this story to everybody watching this TV show, I'm like, this is lame. You two are so lame together. And it's kind of how I mean, maybe I'm bringing that from the comics. I just find them to be such a wet blanket of a couple that they're together because Stan Lee wrote the first issue of them wanting to be together. And it's just like, not everybody is right for each other. There's a reason why no writers were in a rush to bring Jean Grey back when Grant Morrison killed her and hooked him up with Emma, because that was a dynamic that was interesting and had a lot of interesting character development and stuff in that. And you put it, it's just like, why are Scott and Jean supposed to be together? Because they're supposed to be together.
But Eric, I think that this episode kind of supports that. Like, I think that when both of them are talking about each other, there is that undercurrent of, just because we're supposed to be together. Of course we are. While at the same time feeling like maybe they don't actually want that.
I guess. Yeah. Yes,
like Cyclops is talking about Jean. Like, is this even the Jean that I have been with, and all this stuff? But she's Jean, and I love her. Of course I do. And Jean definitely is talking like that. Like, is it my memory that love him? Is it just like, do I actually love him, or is it just because I think I should?
Yeah,
I think that kind of carries that theme too.
There's a lot of, I mean, this is the X-Men animated series post Grant Morrison's run, and so there's a lot of that stuff here, because that was stuff he dealt with in the comics too, where Scott was like, Jean's becoming like a god as the Phoenix. How am I supposed to relate to her anymore? And Jean wants Scott to just break out of his shell, and he played on that. I think what this show has never done has shown why they like each other. Like, I understand that they're cosmically meant to be together, but like, does Jean make Scott laugh? Does Scott, like, what do these two do that the other two endeared each other? And maybe I'm asking for too much real life romance, but like, why?
Yeah. Well, like, if you compare the two, like, this is coming right after this thing about Gambit and Rogue and their like star-crossed love.
Yeah.
And you wonder how much they're intentionally juxtaposing those two things, because they're completely different ends of the relationship. You've got like at the very start, because you basically haven't started, and then at kind of the end, like where you have a kid together and you're just sort of like, do I still care about you? I didn't really notice until I'm talking about it now, but they're right next to each other, these two discussions.
Yeah, I didn't think about that either. Like two characters that actually, that like each other versus two characters that have to be together.
Right? But Trish Tilby does not shy away from these discussions.
Yeah.
I think she's a little uncool about how she does this. Well, but she kind of starts pushing Cyclops and like talking about how like he had a secret baby.
She says stuff like, Scott, I'm doing this to show the world. It's like, oh, thank you. You're such a saint. Thank you for finally
so much, Trish.
Putting a program on TV that says mutants, humans, maybe? It's very.
Can we rule it out?
it's a very it feels
I've heard they have emotions.
yeah, it feels very performative in a lot of ways. She's like,
Yeah.
Scott, you should be grateful I'm helping you. Which
Yeah, and then she just goes for the gotcha, like she
yeah.
just like riles him up.
Yeah.
But this does get us a really cool Cyclops moment because
Well,
he doesn't want to take it anymore.
you brought up Utopia, and it felt like this was I felt it when we watched it the first time, but I don't necessarily feel like that is what they're going for as the series goes on. But I feel like this is a flash of the Scott we get post M Day that slow. It felt like a slow burn, and I guess it still kind of is. Like it took years to watch it just peak, but that burn to not just a character whose only purpose in life seems to be leading the X-Men, he becomes a zealot. He becomes not quite a fascist, but he becomes almost another version of Magneto in a lot of ways.
He does, kind of. It is a slow burn thing, but it's also like a Flash kind of a thing because it's like he's playing by the rules, and you do see him kind of struggle with the playing by the rules not having the results
he
that it
says
should. But then it's like there's just this moment where he snaps and he's just like, you know what?
I'm glad I'm not normal. You should be happy we're not normal because you need us, which is a line straight out of The Boys as well.
Well, he says you should be grateful that we are, trying to be Xavier's vision because if we weren't, you would all be dead.
Yeah.
Which is true, but that's just that's like a Magneto line, you know, that's like Magneto would just kill them all so the mutants could be happy. So
it's neither here nor there, but I feel like the Cyclops, when he goes off that deep end, his version is very like mutants first without necessarily having to remove humans. Or his response is like, I'm always going to pick helping mutants over helping humans. Like if he feels like that trolley problem, like you got to save the trolley or the person on the he's always going to save whichever one is a mutant,
whichever one. Yeah, it's true. Which is I feel like you sense from Cyclops when he finally breaks like this, you sense a lot of it being because mutants are like the downtrodden group, like why would I choose to help humans? Humans are fine, know, like they're in power, they're doing fine. So I'm gonna be protecting the people who need it.
There's the scene where Jean, I guess just because she blushes, because Wolverine's like, I've been here for 100 years and I've never seen anyone like you, which isn't entirely true, Rose. But she kisses him. And she's like, oops. And he's like,
kisses him.
Yeah. It feels like she's using somebody with real emotions for her as a solve to deal with her own emotions.
Yeah, that's probably true. I struggled with this moment. I didn't really feel like they had earned it.
Yeah.
Like I can make it make sense, but it felt kind of out of nowhere for the actual kissing part.
Yeah.
I was just like, I guess that happened.
It's interesting because when she pulls away, Wolverine seems more guilty by it because he says, you're Jean Grey, he's Scott Summers. Those are the rules. You just forgot about it.
Yeah.
You just forgot the rules. And it's interesting that that's Wolverine's reaction.
Well, because she's put him in a position to have to do that. Like he knows that she's not declaring her love for Wolverine. She's not saying like, let's run away together and like we'll actually have a sustainable relationship. He knows that she's just using him for, the
At
moment. At
least offer him a throuple situation. Jeez.
Please.
Read the comics.
It made me really sad for Wolverine.
Yeah,
that
it's
moment,
a sad
because
moment for
like,
him.
you know how he's feeling, and the fact that he has to feel that way, and he also has to stop it. Like that's just cruel.
This is where we meet the council that has a weird selection of people in charge.
Yeah, back at Genosha.
They want Magneto to lead, and Magneto, I don't know who he thinks he's fooling. It's like, oh, I don't know if I should lead.
Oh, don't make me sing.
Well, Xavier. And I think what annoys me, knowing what I know, having finished this season, is he's still like, Xavier gave me the X-Men, but we never actually, I feel like we've only seen him lead the X-Men once.
Yeah, it's a shame to miss out on that because he does keep going back to it like, no, I'm good now because I'm being Xavier in his
Yeah,
absence. But yeah, he
we
doesn't
never
actually do
really
that.
see it.
I
But
felt like when the council is talking to Magneto, I felt like they were setting up a scenario in which he was a figurehead because
mm,
they're talking about, like we need to be able to show a face that is unifying to the
yeah,
mutants and that is recognizable to the world and all this stuff. But he immediately is like, yeah, I guess I could take over everything. That'd
yeah,
probably work. But he declares that he's not going to be the only, like, he won't do it unless
uh,
he can have Rogue as his queen.
Rogue is upset. She's like, "You play me for a fool. I'd be your queen and all this stuff." And she's upset. And this is where we then cut to Gambit in a nice suit as Rogue is about to tell him her past. And she explains that when it's funny, she's
Oh,
like,
this
when
is
I'm
so sad.
it is I mean, it's sad because he's just sitting there flicking cards into the fire.
I know. I noticed that so hard because he's just like
Yeah.
flick, burn.
I bet they're all, of hearts too. It's like this deck's out of
You're like, it's
hearts.
fine. I don't need love. Gambit in this, I feel like, is such. I feel like he's done really well because it could read as super pathetic,
Yeah.
but it doesn't. And maybe it's
Yeah.
just because I already love him. Maybe
Yeah.
maybe someone else would be like, this is pathetic. But I feel like he just so instantly knows what's going on, and you know that he's like struggling with like, is this something that would be good for her? If it's something that would be good for her, maybe it should happen, even if it's not with me and all this stuff. I feel like they convey a lot of that.
So she explains when she first met her evil mother, who she doesn't bring up Mystique. She doesn't say the name. We don't see her as Mystique. And I have a thing I want to say about that. She says her mother introduced her to Magneto because Magneto should be able to help. But instead of just working to help her control the powers, he was explaining like mutant culture, mutant artists, and all this stuff, which is also a very Grant Morrison concept. And while there, it's funny, she's in that Jim Lee Savage Land jungle outfit, kind of, because the Jim
Look at the
Lee one,
flashbacks.
the Jim Lee one is very like, no, it's just torn clothes. Look, you almost can see everything. Whereas this is more like Lara Croft, like they're hot pants. It's not,
Yeah.
it's not a
It's like
torn,
I'm in a jungle, but I'm still doing work.
yeah, it's not a torn thong that's hanging there by some Magneto's holding it up with his powers. It's an outfit.
Ew.
Um, but we find while they're having dinner one night, they touch hands and they realize their powers work, and there's other things they can now do. And
Yes, they can touch because his magnetic field
Mhm.
protects him or something.
Yeah. And so there's the Rogue Magneto romance, we know has been talked about already, but now we just, now it's made text. And she explained, and like you say, Gambit's reaction isn't, how could you have been with Magneto?
Mhm.
It's, what are you going to do now? Are you going
Yeah.
to take the offer and everything? And she says, like, I can't touch anybody, I can't touch you. And Gambit's like, that doesn't matter. Things are more than skin deep. And she's like, not this
Mhm.
thing. So we get, not just from Nightcrawler, but from Gambit himself, that, yeah, he flirts and is like, maybe it's worth it to kiss you and all that. But even if we can't, I love you, Rogue, which
Mhm.
is catnip for Hilary with these
It sure
characters.
is, baby.
When Gambit's like, I
Yeah.
don't care, we can't kiss. I love you, girl.
I love you.
Yeah.
I think it's really, I mean, I just love it. And it's sad to me that the level of
Emotion
of
Gambit shows when he sheds that simple tear.
yes, but like it's sad that we only get it
Now.
now
Yeah.
when he's sad. And like
Yeah.
we went straight from cutesy flirtation back in the original series
Mhm.
to her moving on.
Yeah.
We never got to see them actually be kind
Well,
of like, yeah, let's just care about each
he
other
kind
at
of calls
least
her
for
out
a
on it
while.
too. He's like, I've been your swamp rat. I played the role of the swamp rat. Like, you wanted to
Mhm.
keep it at a distance. You wanted to keep this very flirty and surface level, even though we both knew it wasn't, but that's where you were. So I played that role. But now you're trying to make a choice that we need to decide what is this relationship. And
Yeah.
in this moment, Rogue makes the wrong choice.
Right. Which I feel like makes sense, but is also obviously a
Yeah.
horrible choice.
She says, you light up everything you touch, which is his powers, except her,
Uh-huh.
because of her powers. Ah.
Mutants.
Anyway, they're throwing a
Yeah.
party. It's basically the Hellfire Gala from the Krakoa era, but Genosha's throwing a party. So again, just like Krakoa, all this society is just dancing and partying.
Dancing and using your powers in flashy ways.
So Valerie Cooper is there and complaining about how could you let a mutant terrorist, Magneto's there, and she's like, how could you let a mutant terrorist be your leader? It's like, well, other nations let their leaders be terrorists. And Val Cooper is just, she can't win in these verbal spars. Like, everybody always ones up her. And he says, I asked Rogue to be my queen, and Val Cooper says, really? What'd she say? And I don't know if you had this theory on your own, Hilary, or if I've brought it up, but an internet theory I had seen while this show was happening that we never saw resolved is that Val Cooper is actually Mystique.
Oh, that's interesting. That could work.
It doesn't totally make sense with the way the last few episodes play out, I feel like, and especially...
Well, maybe she killed her after that and took over when she was in Genosha.
Well, I think it's this scene where her reaction to Rogue? Oh, what did Rogue say? That makes me feel like there's some weight to that.
That is interesting. I just thought it was, the whole reason, ostensibly, aside from just wanting to steal her away from Gambit, was to soften his image.
Yes,
and I feel like she is such a
there.
visible X-Men, positive mutant influence that she was just like, oh, okay, well, that does actually work.
Look, this is... Emma Frost is... She's kind of wasted in the 90s show, but the idea of an Emma Frost as a hero character hadn't quite landed yet. And so she's also wasted here because this is the post-Morrison era. But she gets the line where Val Cooper walks up and is upset, and I think it's Sebastian Shaw who's like, Val, or Miss Cooper, what's wrong? And Emma says, is it your dress? Oh, it's so good. Oh, I love it. That's why I love Emma Frost so much. It's so good. Is it your dress?
She is fantastic. She is fantastic. That's Martha Marion. She's new into this show as Emma Frost.
It's so bitchy.
Yep, that's her.
Oh, I love it.
I love the balance in Emma of true power and true really high ambition and just pure pettiness.
Yes. There's a line in the comics where Jean says, why are you this way? And she says something like, it's just proper breeding or something. And it's just like, Anyway, they say, what does she say? And Gambit is having a conversation with Madeline Pryor about all of that. And Rogue starts floating down to the Ace of Base song, Happy Nation.
She's very dramatically descending from on high with a fancy dress.
And a fancy dress. And everybody else is like, oh! And everybody starts sexy dancing as well. And Magneto and Rogue's dance is pretty spicy. A lot of hands interlocking and hands on thighs.
I don't understand politically, from a global politics perspective. I don't understand why they go immediately for she has to be my lover.
Yeah.
It's not we're going to be a team. I'm going to rule, she's going to rule. We're ruling together, both of us. You get both perspectives. It's going to be great. It's I'm going to be king and she's going to be in my bed.
Right. But I think that's what the two of them have been dancing around until this moment. And if she's going to be like, fine, I'll lead with you. She's also saying to him, and, I'll be your queen. Here's the thing. I've said I don't like the animation style in just talking head scenes, but I like it in action scenes. But I also like it's able to use lighting much better than the
Yes,
90s
that's
show
true.
was, which this one does. And even if it's just, we put a slight pink overlay over, that's fine.
Mhm.
But it is able to do shadow and lighting in a lot different ways. So it can be creepier, like the Limbo episode, or it can be sexier, like in this thing. And,
Yeah.
I brought that up when I was talking on a comic book coffee break with Nick about Creature Commandos and how I liked its animation style and how I liked that it was able to do stuff with shadows and things. That new Batman show that's on Amazon, I felt very cheap and flat. And it's nice that they're using that Disney money not just to do motion well, but to do atmosphere well.
Yeah, and it gives it a lot of depth. Like you in those scenes with the dancing,
Yeah.
you feel like you're in the room with
Yeah,
like a
and,
whole mess of people.
I get this episode specifically, and I don't know if this makes any sense at all, but like watching this episode, I'm reminded of like when I was a kid and an animated series would somehow get a direct-to-DVD movie, like in the 80s or early 90s or something, and how you'd see like it's the same thing as what you're watching on TV, but the animation quality is different and vibes are it's just that kind of thing. I don't know how to explain it. It's like the difference between the Batman animated series and Batman Mask of the Phantasm. It's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's just this episode that I
It's
get
a
that
budget
vibe
thing.
from.
It's a budget thing. That's all it is.
Yeah, but it's this episode. I think it's just how episodic that's not the right word. It just feels very by itself to the rest of the
Cinematic?
series. It is, yeah, but like it feels like it's not necessarily worrying about other things. It's just trying to create these moments. I don't know. I can't explain it. It doesn't make sense.
No, I get it.
Rogue kisses Magneto because she doesn't care about. I assume, if we're talking about the 90s, I assume at least a 40-year age difference.
Yeah. Oh,
right?
No. He's keeping it tight, though.
Is he? Because they designed his face to look more wrinkly.
It is older. You're
But
right.
when
Yeah.
we see him again, he will be jacked. But yes, it is a huge age gap that she doesn't seem to mind at all.
You know what else she doesn't seem to mind? Making out with a different guy right in front of Gambit in public while he has to just stand there and take it.
Well, she says after they kiss, sorry.
This is so fast. Eric, I cannot with how this goes down.
As soon as she
So she comes in, they do their little dance. She's like officially, publicly accepting like that she's going to be with him. She kisses him also in front of everybody. Like this is locked in. And then just immediately is like, you know what? In hindsight, perhaps no.
Well,
and it's just so fast.
I mean, it kind of feels like the Back to the Future scene. Leah Thompson kisses Marty McFly and says,
"Oh, yeah.
Oh, like she's just instantly like, it felt like kissing my brother.
Kissing my brother.
And I just get the vibe that as soon as she kisses him, she's like, oh, whoops.
Yeah. I think you're right, but I think that probably what it's missing is because it's animation. Like if it was a live actor, she could probably convey.
It's true. She kisses him.
Complex progression of emotions or whatever, and like see the decision making in her head, and you just don't have that flexibility and like
she says it fast enough that you think she was thinking it even prior to the kiss, and I feel like we're supposed to assume the kiss is what changes direction for her.
Yeah, I think that's definitely right, but I think that the execution didn't work for me. Like it just felt like, okay, so you just like put everything on track for this entire nation and like the entire world, and like put Gambit through this like torture for no reason at all. We're just immediately gonna look, never mind.
I wrote it down, and I skipped right over it. I don't know why. Hilary, we forgot to talk about the scene that happens before this where Scott is lamenting his son and everything, and Jean is talking to him, like, tell me about your son, and they kiss.
Oh, right.
And then Jean Grey shows up and says, I bet you can explain, and we realize he's been talking to Madeline in his head, and Madeline is then, sent back to the council table and is like, "Oh, sorry, I let my mind wander." And Emma is like, "A wander indeed," because that's her storyline from the new X-Men Morrison years.
Yep.
And then Jean and Scott have a huge, they have a fight about like where they are and, how long have you been mentally having an affair with Madeline?
Yep.
And she's like, "I gave up the cosmos for you." And he's like, "You remember giving it. Is that how you still feel?" And it's kind of like your Captain Marvel thing where Jean has the memories, but she doesn't have the emotions to some of them. And she's not sure, do I remember I love Scott or do I actually love Scott? And so they have this fight, and then she gets a psychic wah, and I remember
that is what it is.
I remember that because that's what Madeline has as Gambit's about to be like, "Ugh, Gambit's seen enough," and Madeline also gets the shiny thing through her head, and we cut outside, and this feels so like atmospheric because you've got the music going, and you've got fireworks, but you've got Cable who shows up. Is like, "Stop the music, we got to do this," but like. He's just going through like what I like about this whole moment is just like the suddenness of it, but also that like maybe it had already started and we didn't know.
Yeah.
I like the, this is happening outside, but nobody knows that. It just has that eerie.
We've all been focusing on
other
the bright, shiny object in the center, which is what all of the people who are there have been focusing on. It's like we're experiencing that with them.
Right.
While in the background, disaster has been on its way already.
Right. And the fact that we'll later see an explosion. And so we know like somebody has just died, but we don't see it. Nobody knows it's just very like eerie. It's very real world.
It is eerie. Yeah.
That's this moment for me. It's very eerie. The way Cable's like, "I gotta get through," but there's still all this fireworks happening and we don't know like, it's that moment where like, "Oh, are we watching fireworks or explosions?" And Madeline comes out and he's like, "We need to get out of here." And she's like, "Cable, what's going on?" And then he looks at her in the eye. She's like, "Oh, you made it." And before he can warn her, he's getting pulled back into the future. And he's like, "Not now." And he says, "I'm sorry, Mom." And then we see that it's an actual explosion. And I mean, blows up right there, right? Because
it feels like if this was
they go out to see what's going on.
If this was a two-parter, this is where it would split. Like this is like this moment where everything is kind of coming to a head and then everything's going to go boom. And
they come out and they're like, "What's going on?" And they're just an explosion because we see the Sentinel, like the tri-headed Sentinel, it just lights up and everything blows up and they get that kind of flashing of what is happening. They feel the explosion, but they don't really know where they are and everything. And I think this is also what I mean by that light. The fact that this animation is able to do just that creepy, sudden, shocking Sentinel reveal. Where you're like, what's going on? Sentinel lights, explosion. And it's like, whoa. We notice a lot of, when they wake up, Nightcrawler saves Rogue and Magneto from being exploded, and they're like, "How many?" And Gambit's there's like, "Too many. Some people are trying to get out. Nightcrawler's still alive, but he's out of commission."
Well, this is a really good moment. Like, I want to stop with this for a second because Kurt rescues Rogue and Magneto, but he's hit. Like, it's one of those push them out of the way and get hit situations. Which, my son, when he saw that, he was like, "They always do this on TV. Why don't they just pull them out of the way instead of pushing them and getting in front of the billet themselves?" Which I thought was an excellent point. But anyway, that's what happens. And so
Weston, the thing is, you're running to help them, and the push is using your own momentum. So it's one action. To pull somebody, you have to run up, stop, and pull them back. And that stopping...
Okay, it's Nightcrawler, so he could just flash wherever. It's fine. Anyway, so he's hit. And I love this moment because Rogue runs
to check his
him,
pulse.
and he's like maybe dead. Yeah, she wants to check his pulse, but then you see, and it's all this like really close animation. You see her look at her bare hands. She can't touch him. But then, Eric, Gambit is right there. And you get this real impression that you've sort of had the whole time, but this feels like a crystallized moment that they're just a unit.
Yeah.
Like he is there to check Kurt
Yeah.
because she can't.
Yeah.
And that's just like the reflex that he has.
Yeah.
And I just think that's such a great moment. And so he does, and she's and like he's checking Kurt while reporting that
he's
they
alive, but not everybody is. And Magneto.
And you see, Calypso appears to be dead. The fish guy appears to be dead. But there are several mutants that I know only by their appearance, which I guess is offensive. But several like major characters are dead. And then you see I don't know if it's Master Mold or whatever this giant Sentinel is pumping out more Sentinels. This is like an enormous disaster.
Yeah.
Everything is falling down.
And this is also another Grant Morrison storyline, though we later find out it's not quite the same story that he wrote regarding this, but the idea that Genosha is having basically a 9/11 moment.
Yeah.
Which, when the comic came out, it was like right before 9/11 happened. And it always had this, it was just this creepy thing. Because even in the comics, there's an image of Magneto in a wheelchair looking out in his tower as a Sentinel ship flew into it. And it's just such a creepy moment. Here, it's a lot. It's different because this is like a full, like you said, it's dropping all the Sentinels and it's just blowing.
This has like clearly been planned for a long time, and like they have this locked down.
There's a lot going on here. Basically, Magneto is trying to fight the thing while also he's trying to save mutants, especially the Morlocks, because Gambit shows up to help them first.
He shows up really cool.
Yeah. Because he takes out a Sentinel and then he just casually throws a card to make sure the Sentinel's down.
Yeah, he like rides the Sentinel's head through a window.
Yep. Yeah, he gets
to save them.
Yeah, they give him a lot of good moments in this.
They give him a lot of good moments, Eric.
And we get a sad moment where Leech is there and he's like, the X-Men will save us, and if not, Magneto, because Magneto had promised him 2-3 episodes ago, you'll never need to be afraid again because I'm Magneto. And so Magneto starts using...
Who's the rainbow-haired person?
I always want to say Vertigo, but that's not it. She's a classic Morlock character who says the X-Men are no friend of us.
Yes, exactly. The X-Men are no friends to the Morlocks, which is the second reference to that kind of thing in this season, which I really like that. But at the same time, while we're having Magneto protecting the Morlocks, we also see Magneto basically having PTSD flashbacks to his childhood.
Yeah.
So the whole rest of this scene, like of the disaster and everything, whenever you are seeing Magneto, you're seeing him in the context of that and like having made this promise to Leech that he wasn't going to be in danger anymore. And like there's a lot of complexity happening with Magneto while he's kind of trying to be the heavy against the big Sentinel, and sort of sending Rogue and Gambit to like clear the streets and like make sure that people can get out.
It all happened so fast. Was it Angel and Banshee we saw just like flying and they just get obliterated? I think it's Banshee because
I think it's Banshee.
Yeah. So characters that are, not red shirts are just being wiped out. Like,
this is like, it's for real.
The Morlocks and those characters you mentioned, Glob and Leech and Pixie and stuff, they can often feel very red shirty as side characters. But like, we see characters that are, historically have been officially X-Men.
They're title characters. They're like real,
And they're just being...
and so they're all going down. And basically all you really see in like success is Magneto and Rogue and Gambit. Kind of like fighting the good fight.
When they're, going to help, and it's very anime and it's very Akira.
Oh yes.
And its styles because I mean, Gambit gets on a motorcycle and it's not just like, he doesn't just get on a Harley. He gets on a crotch rocket, and with everything that's going on and like the design of that motorcycle and them, it's like, you guys wanted to do an X-Men episode of Akira. And I mean, I've felt this with this animation style too, that there's a lot of anime influence here with the way,
Definitely.
especially, I mean, I know you love it. I just want to tell you that I also love it when Rogue is flying while Gambit is on his motorcycle and they're,
Oh my
they're
gosh.
together
It's so beautiful.
it's
I need to
they're
find a screenshot of that because
they're
I
just
loved that.
they're just doing their thing together.
Yep.
And it's nice
So good.
because people always like, oh, why aren't Superman and Wonder Woman a couple? They're the same. It's like it's nice with these two as well because their powers are so different. So it's not like
Hmm.
they have to be together because their power. It's just like, and in this coupling, Rogue is the powerhouse. Like Gambit
Yes.
is, he has technical powers and everything, which are very helpful. We'll see, but Rogue,
Well, they complement each other, I
yeah,
think. Like she can be like punching and like
yeah.
kind of dealing with the big stuff, and he'll deal with, anything that flies by the wayside. And yeah, it's a good coupling.
So this here's the problem. We've talked about this with other X-Men movie stuff. The action gets so intense sometimes with like Magneto, and it's very knowing that it's doing like epic iconography stuff with like Magneto smashing the
Hmm.
Sentinel's head over and over again with a subway train while he gets
Yep.
blasted into his own statue, and the music is being very epic, and there's explosions. It's doing that big blockbuster thing that sometimes when done right, like here, makes
Yes.
me emotional in ways I don't always appreciate because I can't
Hmm.
handle it in a healthy way
No.
sometimes. Like it's just
Yeah,
so,
sometimes visuals and like it's like it's an example of really impactful
yeah.
filmmaking, like they were really working on this. This is
Well,
like a high quality moment, I think.
it's the difference between like why something in this episode works as opposed to the same thing in the movie Battleship wouldn't work, because we also care, like all of this action and all of these like destructions are character based. It's not just like we had a
Yes.
cool there's a difference between this Sentinel fight and the Sentinel fight from the first episode, which was just here's a Sentinel and here's some cool action moments, which we were like,
Which was a
yeah,
good action
right. It
scene,
was good
like
action
it was
scenes, and
good and it was well done, but the goal was
it
different.
was fist pumpy. Whereas this is like, I can't handle it. It's too much.
Yeah.
Because like
For
you said,
example,
Magneto is destroying this Sentinel because he's reliving his
mhm,
Holocaust moments, and so he's just like taking out
he's
that
like, I have the
anger.
control now. I'm not going to be a kid who
Like,
can't stop this disaster. I'm going to fix
and
this.
also at the beginning of this thing, he says, we will not live tomorrow regretting that we could have saved more. Let's give our all here. But there's also a change as this goes on where he's starting to feel like this leader posturing that he is so good at isn't gonna cut it here.
Yes, you
And
definitely see him realize that, like, okay, now we're cutting our losses, like
yeah,
that we're losing. We are
yeah,
going to lose, and what can I do? And so finally he's like beaten back. And
yeah,
I guess maybe they're behind a bus or something. I don't know. He's kind of bunkered down with Leech.
yeah.
And
Well,
this
he's
big
got a
moment
shield up
happens.
too because Rogue is trying to
Yeah.
save him as all
Yes,
this
but
beam.
they're separated.
Yeah,
It's cool because Magneto and Rogue and Gambit have been kind of a unit this entire
yeah,
episode, but most of this big fight they're separated.
yeah,
And so Magneto is with Leech behind the thing, and
yeah.
he's got a shield up, and he's putting his all into this. Like
Into the shield
this is
as
like
the beam.
the end.
They say
And
something.
so
Do they say Omega level? Is it? I know that they say
Omega
mutant
level
threat, but he
threat.
says Omega
They
level,
say
so they're
Omega
just
level.
doing a constant beam on him. Gambit grabs Rogue and says it's too dangerous, and then Magneto also locks her down to like a street light or something with metal so that she can't get in there. And
He's
what
like
does
drawing the attention.
he
He
says?
says in German to Leech, he says, "Do not be afraid."
Right, and
In German,
then they all blow up.
and then they all blow up. It's so beautiful. It's so sad.
And Rogue is so angry, and she's just
Yeah, she
flying.
kind of goes like
Yep. So it doesn't have three heads
Next word.
anymore. We
Who's
should
there?
say Magneto destroyed one of the heads, but it's got two more. And so it turns away from them as it walking. Rogue is flying at full speed. And
Okay, I have to talk about this. I have to talk about this real quick. Because Rogue, like when she goes bananas, you see, and this is like, I'm always so impressed with how animators can convey acting. Because I know how a human can make their face convey things, but the idea of drawing something to convey this kind of like subtlety is really impressive to me. Because Gambit, you just have this flash where Rogue freaks out and Gambit is like clocking everything. He's
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, so this is what's going to happen. Then he looks over and he sees the motorcycle and he's just like,
yeah,
you see him in like super fast
yeah,
processing, like I'm going to do this and this has to happen and this has to happen all at once. And I just really enjoy the art of that. Like I feel like that the way that they do that, I don't know how you draw something like that. And I was really impressed with that.
Rogue is flying full speed. The two heads turn, or at least a head turns to her and lights up because it's going to blast her. And Gambit charges up his motorcycle and just flips it into her to send her off course.
Yes, because he can see that she's not going to be able to defeat this.
And
thing.
I love it because he knows just throwing a motorcycle at her isn't going to be enough. He has to cause it to explode to send her off course. But doing that,
it is fun how much he has to know how powerful she is because like he would throw something that dangerous at her to protect her.
Because the bigger the thing he charges, the bigger the explosion is going to be. And then when she goes off course, the head turns because it's not worried about her anymore. But now Gambit is jumping up and ready, and he's saying all his cool stuff like the cards always are in Gambit's favor or something. And he's got he made an energy staff as well, which is new. He makes an energy staff and he's ready, and then he gets stabbed by a tentacle from the Sentinel, and it goes in there pretty deep, and we know that Gambit is now gonna die.
Yeah, this is a killing blow.
Yeah.
That's a good moment too, like cinematically, because it's so high energy with him going after it, and you're like, what's he gonna do? Is he gonna beat it? And it's just this abrupt halt.
Yep. And
like stabbing.
Sound, I think there's still sound effects, but any music stops too. It's all just quiet. And the Sentinel says, mutant threat eliminated. And Gambit says the name's Gambit, remember it, which is what the episode's based around. And he charges the whole Sentinel. Because
the whole Sentinel.
And it blows.
Which is, part of it is inside of him. So like this is a suicide move. Yeah,
but because it's, in him, that's how he's able to connect and blow it up. And it's a huge explosion. It kills him. Or at least we assume it does. We haven't gotten 100%. We haven't seen the body yet because it's also going to cut to the X-Men seeing this on the news and freaking out. And then it cuts back and it's very sad because you have Rogue. You talk about it.
So the last scene is kind of, I mean, it's like things have settled, sort of. Like there's disaster everywhere, but this is a moment of calm now because he's destroyed this thing. And you just see Rogue holding Gambit's body. And at this point, their clothes have been kind of tattered so that it's clear that they're skin to skin.
Right, yes. And they've got the shadow over his eyes.
It's clear that they're skin to skin, and she's holding him and crying.
Yeah.
And visually, I've looked at it since, and it has to be intentional, is really similar to the death of Superman, because you have a cover where Lois is holding Superman's body, and the shading is very similar.
Yeah.
So I would be surprised if that wasn't part of it.
Yeah, that's the thing. In an Old Man Logan comic book, he was jumping around New York City, and there's a scene, there was a panel where he like jumps between buildings, and there's a lightning bolt behind him, like the Dark Knight Returns image.
Oh.
And it's just kind of like, okay. So
I mean, I guess these artists are just like comic fans, so maybe they just throw them in.
Yeah.
That's cool. But they're there in sort of a crater. And she's crying and saying, I can't feel you. And it's so awful.
It's because her voice breaks. Oh my! I'm not
Oh,
tearing
the
up. I'm
acting is
fine.
so good.
You know,
The acting is so
I
good.
literally just watched this an hour ago or whatever, and I was fine at the end. And here I am now. Oh, I'm okay. I'm okay.
It's honestly, it's so
Uh, I'm fine. I'm fine. Hilary, the first time I
it's
watched
so
this
sad.
episode, this is the reason why I finally broke down. Like, you know what? I am going to watch this because everybody's saying this episode is great or something. And so I watched it and it ended and I had to take my dog outside and I was just like, I'm okay. I'm okay. Like Kendra, my wife, thought I was talking to our neighbor or something when I came back in. She's like, who are you talking to? I'm like, no one. I'm just talking myself down.
Talking Oh my word. It
Uh,
is, and it's just so beautifully done. And you know what part of it is too? Is when she says, "I can't feel you." The way that they did the audio
yeah.
feels like it's at a distance.
Yeah.
You know? Like it feels like you feel the distance from her physically
Hmm.
as she's over there alone in the middle of a
Yeah.
crater with Gambit, who she's always been able to rely on, who we've
Yeah.
emphasized throughout this entire episode how much of a unit they are, that they're just like him and her, that like whatever she can't do, he will just do
Yeah.
instinctively. And now he's just gone. They're finally
And
able to touch, and he can't feel him
And you
because
know
he's
what else?
gone.
She never told him the choice she made.
That's true.
So, as
That's
far
true
as
because he
she
only
knows,
said it to Magneto.
right. So, for her, she also is probably carrying that guilt that
Mhm.
she was like, things are skin deep sometimes, and this does matter. And so,
Yeah.
she
Yeah.
she didn't really ever get to explain it, or so,
The last thing she did from
was
his perspective
was
was
break up
reject
with
him.
him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because they couldn't touch, which is such an obviously superficial and, like,
Yeah.
important, obviously,
Yeah.
but, like, that's just, like, a skin deep
And I
situation.
mean,
And the way that she rejected Magneto was very clearly tied to accepting Gambit because
yeah.
she uses his words. She
Yeah.
says some things are more than skin
Yeah.
deep or whatever it
She
is.
says he was
So,
right.
you know,
Yeah.
as a viewer, you know that she's like,
Yeah.
"You know what? I'm choosing Gambit." But yeah, you're right. He never knows that.
But he also never, like, as soon as things start happening with the Sentinel,
Mhm.
he's just like pure mission mode. And, like, I don't know if that Sentinel blast would have killed her. I assume it would have, is what we're supposed to also assume. But, he's still there putting it. Anyway, here's the thing.
He sacrifices himself
Here's
for
the thing.
her while she's trying to
Break up with
avenge
him.
Magneto.
Yeah. Okay, here's the thing that isn't emotional that I like, and I like it about the X-Men in general, is their powers are so unique a lot of times and very specific. Whereas, the Justice League and the Avengers can be very punchy. So
Yeah.
it's gonna be like, how do we defeat this? We punch it really hard.
Mhm.
Superman punches
Yeah.
it. Oh, he's down. Wonder Woman will punch it. Even the Flash will punch it, just a lot of times really fast.
Just fast. Yeah,
And
right.
also the Avengers. I mean, Thor, Captain America, Iron Man, Hulk. It's all very punchy. And the X-Men, they can be punchy, but a lot of them have different types of power. And what I like is that all these moments and stuff, like the motorcycle being used to knock Rogue off course, that works because of Gambit's powers, and
Mhm.
Magneto being able to use a train to like whip a Sentinel's head off is because of his, and I just like, it's a thing that I like about the X-Men in general, and I like about this show and this episode is that it's able to not just have those cool moments, but also to come up with solutions like, oh,
Yeah.
what if Gambit is stabbed? Well, then he's still connected, so he can still then blow up that thing.
Yeah.
And it's a part of the thing that I liked so much about House and Powers of X was the idea of like mutant technology is what I think they called it. That you take these powers and start doing those interesting things. Anyway, that's part of the good of this episode. Is
Mhm.
that it's
Yeah.
able to come up with all these problems and solutions that are specifically based around how these powers work, as opposed to, here's a big thing that can take a punch, so you better punch it really hard.
Yeah, you're right.
Anyway, so it's a good episode.
It's a great episode, and, like, it
It
does have the weakness that the entire season
mhm,
has of introducing an enormous concept and getting rid of that enormous concept in the same episode. That's a huge problem,
uh-huh,
but it does it really well, and
yeah.
it's really
The
affecting.
the thing is, it's just that this this one more so than like I like the Limbo episode for the most part, but more so than that episode, so it's all very character. The stakes become like the super high. You can only do this in a comic book stakes, but it's also still character stakes and everything. So it's just like there's just too much all at once
Yeah.
sometimes for my poor little lizard brain to handle. But yeah, I mean, this felt like it's funny to say this about something that used to be a Saturday morning cartoon, but this felt very much like must see TV. This one
Oh, yeah.
episode. And
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily say, like, oh, you've got to watch that second episode, or you got to
Yeah.
watch that Life Death Mojo episode. But this episode is very like, no, this is must see TV.
Mhm.
And I feel like comic book superhero-y stuff used to be able to pull that off in a lot of ways. I felt like the first season of The Flash was must see. I felt like WandaVision was must
Oh,
see.
yeah.
And I just feel like that's hasn't with these MCU shows and with the HBO Max shows, it hasn't really happened. And
Well, I think it's
this one
harder to
has.
do now because when you and I were young, something just had to be a superhero thing and
Yeah.
it was unique and cool, you know? And
Mhm.
nowadays it's like people are inundated with it. So if
Yeah.
it's going to be special, it's got to be special.
Yeah.
And I think this one really is.
Yeah. Well, and I think the thing is, like you said, it's still the same problems because once you get distance away from this episode, you realize, oh, it's the same problem as Limbo, Inferno, all of that, and the Madeline Pryor
Yeah.
stuff. It's the same issue of life death. Like we introduce and we get rid of this the whole Genosha thing in
It's
30 minutes.
huge.
I know, and I do hate that, but they're able to do all the other stuff so well that it's like I don't realize that until
Right.
um
Yeah.
so I don't know, like it's almost exactly like that Limbo episode.
As far as pacing,
Yeah, in terms of pacing, like here's the big storyline, here's the big action thing that resolves it, here's some cameos, there's character stuff, but for some reason that doesn't work, and I think it's because the Scott Jean stuff is so less compelling than
yeah.
this stuff.
Yeah.
And it's just such on a bigger scale, and the stakes are so much higher, and you get innocence like Leech being like, Magneto will save us, and then Magneto's like,
Mhm.
hey buddy.
I would really love to do that.
Yeah, don't be
but-
afraid. And then as he blows up, he's like, oh frick, I said that in German. He doesn't speak German. That wasn't helpful.
No, don't make fun of that moment. It was in German because it was the final
something and Leech
moment
is like,
of the
huh.
journey.
I wonder what he just said.
No, Eric.
Did he say time to die, little Leech mutant?
Yes, that is what he said.
Also,
I don't speak German. Maybe that is what he
and
said.
there are good character moments coming up, and there are high stakes coming up, but it never reaches this peak again.
Yeah, this is definitely the height of the.
I mean, maybe in
of
a
the season.
rewatch, I will find that to be different, but I don't think so. Looking back, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was the episode.
Woo! We got through the most emotional episode of this entire series. Next time, we're going to be talking about Life Death Part 2.
Yeah, which is, again, not going to be just life death. It is a split episode.
What's the other part of it?
The other part is Professor Xavier in space with the Shi'ar.
Oh, that's right. Yep. You love Shi'ar and space stuff, so that'll be fun.
It's going to be very bird-themed.
Lots of birds happening.
Yep.
All right. Thank you to Prophetic Music for our theme song. Previously on X-Men is brought to you by the Radio Meanwhile Network. Other shows on the network include This and Dory Life, 90s Music Got Me Like sometimes, and 9021 Here We Go. So follow us wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time.
Bye.